I was walking near the north exit of Ikebukuro the other day, and for a second, I genuinely forgot I was in Tokyo.
Ikebukuro North, right. That area has changed so much.
It's unbelievable. The whole soundscape, it wasn't the usual quiet, polite capital. It was just loud. Dominated by Mandarin, different regional dialects.
And the signs, I assume. All simplified characters.
Everywhere. Hot pot restaurants, phone shops, those WeChat Pay QR codes are plastered on every single storefront. It really did feel less like a neighborhood and more like a parallel dimension.
A slice of another country dropped right into the middle of Tokyo.
Exactly. And so I stepped into this small supermarket to grab a drink, and that's when the reality of this shift it really hit me. The young cashier, she was barely looking up from her phone, and she didn't greet me with the standard, robotic arashimasu you expect.
Right, which for anyone listening is that ubiquitous formal Japanese welcome you hear everywhere, almost like a machine.
Precisely. Instead, she just hits me with this cheerful, totally automatic greeting in Chinese. It was her default setting. But the moment I replied in Japanese, the whole dynamic just flipped instantly. She didn't just switch languages, she panicked.
Really?
Panicked.
Yeah, she looked flustered, almost apologetic, and she was fumbling through the rest of the transaction in this halting, broken Japanese. And in that moment, right there in the middle of Tokyo, it felt like she was the one at home, and the Japanese language was the intrusion.
It's a powerful image.
And for a growing number of conservatives, this specific kind of interaction isn't just some cultural quirk. They see it as evidence of a silent invasion, a sign that the country is fracturing into these separate, unintegrated enclaves.
Right.
But the question we have to ask is this actually a refusal to assimilate? Or is it maybe the inevitable result of a country that is quietly and maybe reluctantly transforming into an immigration superpower?
That visceral experience you just described.
Yeah.
That feeling where the established cultural norms are momentarily inverted, it just perfectly encapsulates this clash between Japan's cherished identity and its inescapable demographic future.
Yeah, that tension, that feeling of parallel worlds emerging right next to each other.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we need to dissect today.
So that's the mission for this deep dive.
I think so. We need to determine if this visible shift is really being driven by, a refusal from new residents to integrate, or if it's a direct consequence of Japan's own identity framework, a rigid system that might perhaps unintentionally make genuine integration almost impossible.
Okay, so let's unpack this core conflict then. I think we have to start on that philosophical ground you just mentioned, this deeply ingrained idea of Japanese identity, what a lot of analysts call the myth of post-war homogeneity.
It's the cornerstone. It has to be the starting point. There's perception of sameness. It's not some organic accident of history. It is a meticulous, long-term, and cultivated national narrative.
And it's largely underpinned by a specific discourse, right? The Nihon Jinran.
Nihon Jinran, exactly. The term itself means something like theories on Japaneseness, and it's this body of literature and thought that really solidified the idea of Japanese uniqueness after the war.
So how was this identity built? I mean, why did homogeneity become so essential after World War II?
Well, you have to look at the context. For much of the post-war era, Japan was redefining itself completely in the shadow of its relationship with its primary global partner, its security guarantor,
right,
the United States.
Right. The U.S. military presence is still a huge factor.
It is. And this narrative of strategic dependence on the U.S., especially in defense and foreign policy, it created this shared identity discourse right across the political spectrum. It didn't matter if you were on the right or the left.
What do you mean? How did both sides end up in the same place?
Well, the conservative wing often saw the U.S. dependence as a necessary catalyst for Japan's economic miracle. Focus on business, let the U.S. handle security.
Okay.
But the left often saw it as a constraint on true Japanese sovereignty. But the result was the same. If Japan couldn't fully express its autonomy geopolitically,
it had to define itself culturally.
Precisely. The external political reality pushed the internal focus onto culture. And this narrative established homogeneity, this ethnic and cultural uniformity, as the inherently stable, fixed point of the nation.
So it was actively promoted?
Actively and explicitly.
Yeah.
It was presented as the core source of Japan's social harmony, its famously low crime rate, its national strength. The prevailing belief, it was almost a spiritual belief, was that Japan was and would always remain a uniform nation, and that this uniformity was the secret ingredient to its economic and social success.
And now that deep-seated belief is just running headfirst into a staggering demographic reality.
It is. And the friction from that collision, It's creating these profound emotional costs, especially for the older generation who feel this rapid change most acutely.
Right, they're the ones who live their whole lives inside that secret ingredient model.
The emotional cost is just crystallized in the experience of people like Kenji. He's a 70-year-old resident of Nishikawaguchi, an area just outside central Tokyo that's seen some really rapid demographic shifts.
What was his experience?
He described feeling a sudden, disorienting vertigo.
Vertigo.
Yes, a physical sensation, just from seeing simplified Chinese characters on familiar streets and hearing loud, rapid-fire Mandarin filling the public space. For him, this wasn't just multiculturalism. It felt like a profound psychological violation.
Why such a strong physical reaction? I mean, on the surface, it's just a new language, new signs.
Because it felt like a breach of what some analysts call Japan's Galapagos isolation.
The Galapagos syndrome, I've heard that used for their tech, like their flip phones that were so advanced but only worked in Japan.
Exactly. It's the same concept applied to culture. The idea is that Japan's social development happened in high isolation, resulting in these unique systems, incredibly high social trust, meticulous public order, low crime, that acted as a kind of comforting safety blanket for generations.
A predictable social contract.
A very predictable contract. Kenji and his generation, they grew up understanding certain rules. Quiet streets, predictable interactions, a shared language in public.
And when that contract is suddenly breached,
it shatters that feeling of belonging. When the isolation is broken, Kenji felt his own Japanese identity, the one tied to those old social contracts, was suddenly becoming irrelevant in his own neighborhood.
It's a terrifying feeling.
He described it as a profound sense of loss, as if the country was, and this is a quote, evaporating beneath their feet.
Wow.
And that visceral reaction, you see, it provides incredibly fertile ground for the conservative narrative. The one that views these changes not as growth, but as a silent invasion, confirming that a parallel world is now operating inside Japan without needing permission from the host society.
It's a powerful psychological reality.
Yeah.
But it exists alongside a demographic imperative that, well, it just can't be denied. Because despite all the psychological resistance, the raw data shows Japan is functionally a de facto immigrant country right now.
The speed and the scale of this transformation are genuinely stunning, especially when you compare it to Japan's history of exclusion. The total foreign resident population has soared nearly sevenfold since the mid-1980s. It just passed 3.5 million residents recently.
Sevenfold is a massive jump.
It is. But the most startling number is the pace of the acceleration. That's what's creating the shock.
Right. It's a difference between slow, gradual change and sudden, vertigo-inducing change.
Exactly. Our sources indicate that over the last 18 months alone, an average of 1,200 non-Japanese individuals received a work or residence visa every single day.
Every day.
Every single day. That's not a marginal shift. That is nearly 500,000 new residents in just a year and a half. This pace is forcing the country to grapple with a reality it spent 70 years trying to define away.
And a really significant driver of that recent growth, especially among the high-skilled and the affluent, is coming from the Chinese community. I want to spend some time on the motivation behind this migration, which you described using the term runri.
Yes, runri. It literally translates to escape to Japan. And this phenomenon is so crucial because it indicates a motivation that really transcends that traditional transactional economic migration.
You mean it's not just about getting a higher salary?
It's not just about higher wages. For the runri migrants, the destination is philosophical.
What are they escaping from then? What does this escape look like in real terms?
They're seeking a higher quality of life and a more unrestricted lifestyle compared to their home country. This quest isn't just about financial security. It's about personal liberty, social stability, and a reliable rule of law.
So they see Japan as a model society in some way.
They view Japan not just as a place for stable employment, but as a viable alternative socio-political model. This marks a deliberate quest for personal liberty and systemic stability that they feel is missing where they come from. It really elevates the discussion from simple labor arbitrage to a fundamental choice about what kind of modern society they want to live in.
Which makes the government's historical denial of the situation even more striking. If the motivation for people coming is that profound, why did they spend so long avoiding the term immigrant country?
For decades, the government successfully played a definition game to maintain the myth of non-immigration. They did this by being very legalistic.
How so?
They historically defined immigrants only as those who enter the country with permanent residency rights from day one. By using temporary visa schemes, they could claim they were only importing trainees or temporary workers, not permanent residents.
And the most famous of these was the Technical Intern Training Program, or TITP.
Exactly. And we should probably clarify that for the listener.
Yeah, please, because that program was central to Japan's labor strategy for years.
The TITP, the Technical Intern Training Program, was, on paper, a program for transferring Japanese technology to developing nations. That was the official story.
But in reality,
it became a controversial de facto mechanism for importing low-cost, low-skilled labor into sectors that Japanese workers increasingly avoid.
like construction, agriculture, so-called 3D jobs.
Dirty, dangerous, and demeaning. Exactly. It allowed Japan to fill critical labor gaps without ever having to acknowledge these workers as immigrants. It was a workaround.
And now that program, that entire workaround, has been abolished and replaced.
Yes. And this is huge. It was replaced by the new training for employment system, and this change signals a major breakthrough in the official government discourse.
What changed in the language?
When this replacement was announced, Justice Minister Koizumi, he framed the new system as a definitive step in opening up the country. And crucially, he explicitly anticipated an increase in permanent residents. He even said the new system acknowledges the long-term needs of the country.
That's a massive shift in rhetoric.
It's a tectonic shift. That statement, coming from a high-ranking official, it represents the political establishment finally beginning to acknowledge the demographic imperative, even if the cultural acceptance lags far, far behind.
And that gap between policy necessity and cultural willingness, that's precisely where these interior frontiers exist.
Yes.
So migrants, they might successfully cross the physical border, but then they immediately run into these invisible societal barriers that prevent genuine acceptance and full integration.
That's the key concept. We call them interior frontiers because they are these subtle, invisible thresholds of belonging. They're vernacular boundaries that operate inside society and especially inside the workplace, denying newcomers full membership. These walls, they aren't codified in law, but they are immensely powerful in determining your quality of life.
And this seems to play out most acutely, and I would guess most painfully, in the professional world, particularly among the highly skilled migrants that Japan is trying so desperately to attract.
Absolutely. We can see this in the story of Lynn. She's a highly skilled software engineer working in Minato-ku, which is one of Tokyo's most elite business districts.
So on paper, she's the perfect solution.
The perfect solution to Japan's acute labor shortages. She has cutting-edge technical expertise, high-level language skills, and she was genuinely drawn to the orderly, high-trust life that Japan promised. But after arriving, she found herself hitting a profound glass wall in her workplace.
A glass wall. Tell me more about that moment. What did that feel like for her?
Lynn described it happening at a company drinking party, a nomikai.
Ah, the nomikai, the infamous mandatory fun.
Infamous, but often crucial spaces for informal bonding and even career advancement in Japanese corporate culture. As the alcohol flowed, the camaraderie among her Japanese male colleagues became spontaneous, relaxed, real.
Okay.
But the moment Lynn tried to join the banter, the entire atmosphere just changed instantly. The warmth dissolved, and it was replaced by this stiff, impenetrable politeness.
So she was walled off.
Completely. And she realized in that moment that she wasn't seen as a person or a colleague. She was viewed as a functional asset, a high-end machine, to be utilized for her technical output, but not as a genuine social peer.
That distinction, asset versus colleague, that has to be incredibly isolating.
It creates what she called an internal boundary that forces people like Lynn to build these parallel, entirely expat-centric social communities outside the company because they can't find it within.
And what happened to her?
Ultimately, the isolation became so intense that despite her high salary, despite her high-value contribution, she decided to leave Japan entirely. She's relocating to Canada.
So there it is, the high-skilled paradox in action.
It is.
Japan attracts the global talent it desperately needs to compensate for its shrinking workforce, only to treat them in a way that actively forces them to leave. They're essentially exporting their own future economic viability.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So what is the fundamental mechanism driving this systemic exclusion in the workplace? What's at the core of it?
At the core, it's a demand for what some researchers call coerced harmonization.
Coerced harmonization.
In most Japanese companies, the deeply held desire for homogeneity, for sameness, it overrides the stated goal of diversity. So highly skilled migrants are implicitly and sometimes explicitly expected to conform culturally, linguistically, even behaviorally to operate identically to their Japanese peers.
They're being measured against an impossible standard.
They are measured against the ideal Japanese employee. Someone who just intuitively understands all the subtle cues, the unstated rules, and who prioritizes group harmony, the wa, above all else.
So if they bring a different style, a different perspective, or maybe more assertive global business approach, they're not seen as bringing diversity. They're seen as an interference.
Exactly. They are often viewed as an imperfect substitute for global talent, rather than as talent bringing unique skills that should be leveraged. The goal, therefore, isn't truly about leveraging diversity or improving global competitiveness. It's simply assimilation back into the existing monolithic corporate structure.
This sounds like a really deep structural problem that's preventing Japan from adapting to global human resource best practices.
That's precisely right. When analysts study global diversity management, most Japanese companies fall squarely into the monolithic category.
Which is the lowest level.
It's the lowest degree of structural integration. In these environments, non-Japanese employees are often just disregarded. Their unique perspectives, their skills, are systemically undervalued because they disrupt the familiar rhythm of the homogeneous workplace.
So it's an attitude problem at its root.
The core problem is that the ethnocentric attitudes, which are heavily influenced by that Nihon Jinran narrative of uniqueness and, frankly, superiority, make it difficult for employers to genuinely accept talent that doesn't look and act like them.
And beyond the cultural expectations, the traditional Japanese employment system itself seems like it's perfectly designed to act as an interior frontier.
Oh, it absolutely functions as a systemic barrier, especially for mid-career, highly skilled migrants. Traditional Japanese HR practices are just so deeply rooted in the concept of lifelong employment.
A system that worked well when the population was young and everyone was Japanese?
It worked well for a specific time and place, but now it actively punishes global mobile talent.
How does the seniority-based promotion system clash with a globalized labor market? That seems like a major friction point.
It's a huge one. Global talent, they expect meritocratic, performance-based career progression. The Japanese system, conversely, operates on strict seniority. Promotion is dependent on the length of time you've served at the company, period.
So a brilliant engineer who joins at age 35...
even if they're exceptional, will find themselves permanently behind colleagues who joined straight out of university at 22. Doesn't matter how good you are. That structure just fundamentally stifles career development and progression for mid-career international hires, and it causes immense frustration.
And what if they want to move jobs? Does the system punish mobility as well?
It does. Furthermore, the training in this lifelong employment model is often intensely company-specific. It's not transferable. It's designed to deepen your loyalty to one firm, not to make you competitive on the global market. So this limits mid-career mobility, effectively locking employees into their initial, often unsatisfactory places of employment, or making them highly uncompetitive if they seek to leave. It just removes agency from the employee.
And what about the money? The salaries are designed for this long-term loyalty model too, right?
Yes. Salaries are low at the start, precisely because they're structured for decades of slow, steady progression. They're designed to eventually reward that loyalty with stability and high final salaries before retirement.
Which is a disaster for a migrant who might only stay for 5 or 10 years.
It fundamentally frustrates them. They're accustomed to high starting wages that reflect their immediate value, so they tend to leave long before they ever benefit from the yearly increments designed to reward decades of service. It creates this continuous cycle of churn where Japan attracts and trains talent only to lose it.
Let's talk about the hiring process itself. We've talked about the cultural expectations once you're in, but is there also just overt exclusion at the ground level, at the first interview?
The sources indicate very clear evidence of what's called taste-based discrimination in hiring.
Taste-based?
It isn't just a lack of cultural understanding. It's rooted in employers' personal and societal preference for native applicants. It's a prejudice against other ethnic groups.
Is there data on this?
Yes. Studies have found that even when you control for all human capital skills education, even Japanese proficiency non-Japanese applicants are significantly less likely to progress past the first interview stage. Employers simply prefer a homogeneous workplace, even if it means sacrificing high-quality talent.
And the language requirement, the insistence on near-native Japanese proficiency, that must play into this. It feels like a convenient way to enforce that homogeneity.
It is the ultimate inside-outsider binary. Employers insist on Japanese proficiency as this strict precondition for employment, which, while it sounds reasonable on the surface,
It's more than that.
to many migrants, it's perceived as an expectation of absolute one-way submission. And the irony here lies in the asymmetry of it all.
What do you mean?
Japan needs global talent. It needs global connectivity. Most Japanese students study English for years. It's the global lingua franca. And yet, employers show little to no reciprocal effort to adopt multilingual practices or use English in the workplace. This insistence on one-way adaptation is a powerful reinforcement of that internal frontier.
So with all these systemic and cultural walls preventing integration, it's completely understandable that migrants fall back on their own networks.
That's the only rational thing to do.
And that naturally leads to the formation of these visible, self-sustaining ethnic communities, the very parallel communities we started our deep dive describing in Ikebukuro.
It is a natural, necessary human response to exclusion. And while ethnic enclaves are sometimes viewed negatively by the host society, often feeding right into that silent invasion narrative, they are absolutely vital.
Why vital?
They are self-sustaining ecosystems that provide crucial immediate support. Familiarity, cultural comfort, language assistance help navigating a rigid and often confusing social system. They function as a necessary buffer zone.
We need some concrete examples to show how these ecosystems function. I mean, beyond just a cluster of restaurants.
A great example is the Takadano-baba area in Tokyo. It hosts a significant and very self-sufficient Myanmar community.
Okay.
Despite the immense pressure to just melt into the mainstream, this community has built a robust, self-sufficient local economy and social structure. You find something like 20 immigrant-run shops, restaurants, salons, general stores, all catering to specific cultural and linguistic needs.
So it's a real community infrastructure.
And it goes beyond commerce. Crucially, they established the Japan-Myanmar Culture Center, the JMCC.
What does that do?
It's a vital hub. It provides cultural education, social support, and it often acts as a critical intermediary with local authorities and employers. This demonstrates a high degree of communal self-sufficiency and organization. It helps new arrivals survive where the Japanese system fails to support them.
But these support systems, by their very definition, they lead to residential segregation. And that's often where the tension with the Japanese majority becomes most visible, most anxiety-inducing for longtime residents.
Residential segregation is confirmed across the board. All major immigrant groups exhibit measurable residential segregation from the Japanese majority.
But there's a nuance there, isn't there?
There is. What's fascinating is the dichotomy that's emerging among the affluent, high-skilled Chinese migrants, that Runri demographic we talked about.
Right. You mentioned there's self-segregation in high-income areas. How does that work in terms of actual integration? It seems counterintuitive.
They often exhibit self-segregation. But it's driven by affluence and choice, not by economic necessity. They gravitate toward expensive, desirable housing. Often they move into these luxury power mansion high-rises in areas like Toyosu.
Which are also popular with wealthy Japanese families.
Exactly. Because these high-end, newly built developments are also popular with upwardly mobile Japanese citizens, this pattern actually results in less residential segregation from the majority than you find in traditional, economically necessitated, low-income enclaves.
So it's integration by proximity, but maybe not by culture.
That's a great way to put it. The community identity remains strong and somewhat separate, even within that shared physical space.
Yet even this affluent shift causes significant friction, particularly when it intersects with public services like education, which really touches the core of community life.
This is where Japan's massive depopulation problem creates a structural vacuum. Japan has empty classrooms, and its public schools are, ironically, functioning as an attractive second school district for affluent Chinese families.
And they're coming specifically to escape the hyper-competitive exam systems in their home country.
Precisely. And this has tangible, immediate, and very localized effects.
Give me the numbers on that localized effect.
Okay, look at Bunkyoku. It's an affluent central Tokyo district renowned for its highly prestigious, high-performing public elementary schools. Our sources indicate that over 10% of the students in those prestigious elementary schools are now Chinese.
10%. That's not a small number, and that change must have happened very quickly.
At a shocking speed at the local level. And this demographic transformation is happening right there in the classroom.
And what's the reaction from the Japanese residents?
It creates significant cultural anxiety. Some Japanese families in the area are reportedly considering moving their children because they're uncomfortable with the rapidly changing classroom environment and just the sheer density of newcomers.
So the economic benefit of attracting these wealthy, education-focused families is being weighed directly against the anxiety over local cultural stability.
And perceived community norms. It forces the reality of diversity onto the most sacred space of the local community, the school.
And finally, on this point, let's talk about the children who are caught in the middle of this whole transformation. The second generation, or SGIs, second generation individuals, they're growing up fluent in both worlds. So where do they land on identity when both the schools and society are shifting beneath them?
They exist in a chronic liminal space, a perpetual in-betweenness.
Liminal.
These children are often linguistically and culturally fluent in Japanese society. They grew up in the system, they understand the unspoken rules, and they're fully functional members of the younger generation. But their identity is continuously determined not by their own sense of self, but by external perception.
Meaning what?
Meaning that despite their fluency, they are constantly reminded that they are outsiders because of their name, their appearance, or the simple fact of their parents' foreign background.
So they're never fully accepted.
Essentially, they are too Japanese for their ancestral home to accept them fully, but they're too foreign for Japan to accept them fully. This feeling of being perpetually an outsider, even for those who grew up entirely within the Japanese school system, it creates a significant sense of alienation.
And this alienation has to have real-world consequences for Japan's future labor pool.
Absolutely. This unresolved identity struggle, this lack of full, unquestioning acceptance, is pushing many second-generation individuals to entertain the idea of living outside Japan.
So they're looking to leave.
They look for societies where their fluency and cultural knowledge are matched by full and easy acceptance, without the daily effort of having to prove they belong. And again, Japan risks actively exporting the very talent, the bridging capacity, the bilingual skills it desperately needs to manage its future.
So we have this massive economic and demographic pull forcing Japan open, but a powerful internal philosophical break resisting it. Let's delve into that rock now, the deep cultural conviction that prevents true policy change and structural integration.
The break is philosophical, and it's called communitarianism. This is the guiding principle that prioritizes the preservation of the host state's unique national identity, culture, and social order above virtually all other economic or utilitarian interests.
Okay, so it's culture over economics.
This cultural interest acts as a powerful checkmate against the purely economic philosophy that just says maximize wealth by importing labor.
So the economic argument for open borders says we need labor to fund pensions and keep the economy alive, but the communitarian argument counters with, but at what existential cost to our unique identity and our social stability?
Precisely. And in Japan, communitarianism is tightly linked to the ethos of craftsmanship, high social trust, and low crime. The preservation of this unique social environment is considered a top national priority.
And this brings us to a perfect illustration of this tension. The craftsman's dilemma.
It does.
Tell me about Tanaka, the master machinist.
Tanaka is a 75-year-old master machinist in Oda City, a district famous for being the heart of Japan's monozukuri.
Monozukuri, the spirit of manufacturing.
Yes, the high-quality, meticulous manufacturing ethos. Tanaka is dedicated to producing micron-level precision parts, the ultimate expression of Japan's high-trust, perfectionist culture. For him, this work isn't just a job. It's a moral philosophy.
But the demographic reality is closing in on him.
It is. The demographic reality means he has no Japanese successor. The younger Japanese generation, particularly in the big cities, are just not interested in that kind of physically demanding, often low-status work.
The 3D jobs again.
The dirty, dangerous, and demeaning jobs. They have plagued the workforce for decades as the country got richer.
So he had no choice but to rely on foreign labor to keep his uniquely Japanese legacy alive.
He had to rely on Nguyen, his Vietnamese apprentice. And Tanaka, he initially struggled intensely with this decision. He feared Nguyen wouldn't understand the spirit of the craft, the implicit understanding of precision and responsibility that he felt was just inherent to Japanese culture.
There was a real personal tension there.
A profound tension between his belief in the purity of the tradition and the stark necessity of using foreign labor just to survive.
And that is the ultimate paradox.
It is.
The unique Japanese tradition of monozukuri, the high-trust craftsmanship that defines their global reputation for quality, is literally being preserved by the impurity of immigration.
It is survival by compromise. The survival of Japan's quality ethos now relies on accepting the dilution of its perceived cultural purity. It shows that the necessity of labor is overcoming the conviction of homogeneity. But that internal struggle is far from over.
And that struggle has now spilled directly into the political arena, where migration is a central and highly charged election issue.
It has become a flashpoint. And this is fueled by the record high of 3.77 million foreign residents and that intense post-pandemic tourism surge that created significant local overload in certain popular areas. This environment of rapid, visible change has been a perfect breeding ground for anti-immigration sentiment and the rise of far-right politics.
We've seen the success of the Sanseido Party really capitalizing on this anxiety.
Analysts point directly to the Sanseido Party's success winning 14 seats in the upper house election as hard evidence of a significant political shift. They campaigned explicitly on the silent invasion and Japanese first rhetoric.
Directly addressing the fears of people like Kenji.
Yes, people who feel their cultural stability is threatened, and their success has, in turn, forced the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, to adopt a considerably harder line on immigration and national identity to court those conservative voters.
And the political strategy of LDP leaders like Sana Takeichi, who is a significant prime minister in waiting, it reflects this shift.
Her rhetoric is a crucial barometer of the direction the mainstream Conservative Party is taking. She advocates for what she calls controlled openness and safeguarding sovereignty, framing her vision around stringently managing foreign arrivals and cracking down on perceived abusers of the system.
And this is resonating with the public.
Deeply. It's become the party line because it works.
And how deep is that public mood?
It's pervasive. Polls indicate that 65% of Japanese favor tighter controls on immigration, and a startling 40% admit to expressing discomfort with having foreign neighbors. Takeichi's political positioning expertly links immigration to cultural preservation and national security, successfully aligning with that large segment of the population that is uneasy with the speed of change.
And here's where the political narrative gets really interesting, because it weaponizes external geopolitical anxieties. The public discourse is increasingly focusing on China as the strategic other.
That anxiety is a crucial mechanism. The geopolitical fears about China's regional rise, its expanding military influence, the perception of economic competition, all of that directly spills over into the domestic realm.
So the external threat becomes an internal one.
The external strategic fear is used to frame Chinese immigrants as a kind of domestic extension of the external threat. They become a localized target for anxieties about national security and cultural integrity, powerfully fueling that silent invasion narrative we heard in Ikebukuro.
And the political rhetoric often intentionally conflates distinct groups of foreign nationals, right? The line between a tourist, a worker, and a potential threat gets very blurry.
It is a strategic blurring. Political elites often combine fundamentally distinct categories: migrant workers, high-skilled professionals like Lin, transient tourists, and asylum seekers, under one broad negative umbrella term, like foreign nationals. And this is done despite the fact that each category requires entirely distinct policy approaches.
You see this in policy announcements that link immigration directly to crime.
Yes. For example, when the then Prime Minister announced the launch of a task force to deal specifically with crimes committed by foreign nationals, it strategically linked immigration with crime in the public discourse. Now, we should be clear that empirical data doesn't necessarily support that link, but the political framing serves its purpose.
Which is to reinforce the perception that foreign arrivals pose a risk to the high-trust social order. And this political climate, fueled by anxiety and geopolitical conflation, it has measurable negative social costs on the ground for immigrants who are already here and trying to function.
The tangible results of this backlash are concerning, and they demonstrate the chilling effect of the anti-foreigner rhetoric. Anti-foreigner incidents jumped 25% in 2025.
And there's systemic discrimination.
Pervasive discrimination in daily life. For instance, the shocking statistic that 70% of foreigners face rental denials. That is the direct manifestation of this fear and preference for homogeneity.
And the rise in global tensions is importing new forms of prejudice into Japan.
Exactly. The rise in global conflict has fueled an alarming spike in Islamophobia, with surveys indicating that 35% of respondents now view Islam as a threat to harmony.
And they link that to politics.
It's often linked directly to political warnings about the potential for regional conflict import, suggesting that simply having diverse religious or ethnic groups present inherently destabilizes the country. This systemic exclusion, rooted in cultural preservation, places an enormous strain on the very people Japan needs to survive.
This entire deep dive has been a fascinating and really complex look at a country caught in an existential vice. Japan is being required by demographic necessity to embrace diversity and change its foundational structures, yet its institutional framework and its deep cultural preferences are fundamentally fighting that reality every single step of the way.
That is the core defining tension of modern Japan. Its vision of an alternative modern life, one defined by high social trust, meticulous craftsmanship, and order. It's facing a fundamental viability test right now. To secure its future, Japan has to overcome this rigidity. It must find a way for its necessary immigrant population to be recognized not merely as functional labor units or high-end machines or temporary substitutes, but as integrated members whose presence is essential to the continuation and the evolution of the Japanese story itself. If its deep-seated preference for cultural purity prevails over its economic needs, it risks actively forcing the very talent and skills from the highly educated engineer Lin to the next generation craftsman Nguyen to seek belonging and opportunity elsewhere, actively exporting the human capital that is meant to power its graceful decline and its subsequent survival.